A review of Milo Murphy's Law on Friday the 13th? What could go wrong? It's my world and we're all living in it. Hello everybody, I'm KC and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about Milo Murphy's Law. It might seem odd that I'm talking about this show now, since its fate is ambiguous, but not looking good. And I'm sure you guys are more interested in me talking about other Disney shows, but I've actually wanted to do a video on Milo Murphy's Law for a long time now. Mostly because it doesn't get that much love, even though it's really good. So of course I have quite a bit to say about it. More than I thought, actually. Since the show already has 2 seasons under its belt, and talking about the whole series would be too much for a video, and 1 episode wouldn't be enough, right now we're going to go over the first season and see how this show started off. So let's take a look at season 1 of Milo Murphy's Law. Milo Murphy is a kid who's a part of the Murphy family that embodies Murphy's Law, meaning that everything that can go wrong around him will go wrong. Of course, antics and shenanigans ensue as Milo works around his genetic curse with the help of his friends, family, dog, and colorful characters of all kinds. Now before we go any further, let's address something real quick. Milo Murphy's Law is the second animated series created by Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh, the eccentric duo behind the incredibly successful and acclaimed Phineas and Ferb. And while Milo Murphy's Law has a lot of its own to offer, comparisons to Phineas and Ferb are kind of inevitable. Not only because of how insanely successful the former was, but because it turns out Dan and Swampy have a certain signature style in some areas, especially in comedy. So there are points in this video where I'm likely going to be comparing the two, so forgive me if that's not fair, but I still think it's worthy of discussion. Right now though, let's focus on the premise of Milo Murphy's Law. I remember back when I heard the pitch for this series that it sounded like a pretty good idea for a cartoon. A lot of the best classic cartoons are basically eccentric characters outrunning or getting on top of things going wrong, trying to put out a wick on a stick of dynamite, failing to catch the Roadrunner in exaggerated ways, trying to clean up a mistake before someone can see it and only making it worse. Finding an in-universe explanation for those over-the-top antics is really amusing to me, and to say they take full advantage of this premise is kind of an understatement. Most episodes of Milo Murphy's Law have the characters trying to do something average and maybe even mundane, and thanks to Milo's perpetual and uncontrollable bad luck, turns it into a much bigger and exaggerated adventure, trying to outrun and outthink every obstacle that comes with Murphy's Law. And most of the best episodes of the first season push this concept to the absolute limit. In the very first episode, Milo is just trying to get to school until Murphy's Law gets in the way. Him and the new kid Zach run into many obstacles that only get more dangerous and absurd until they eventually wind up abducted by aliens. Yeah. It's that kind of show. But the show never really loses itself in the chaos it creates. Most subpar cartoons tend to be random and absurd just for the sake of doing weird stuff, but the way Murphy's Law causes chaos has a sort of cause and effect to it. The destinations and results may get more and more ridiculous, but the way the characters wound up there more or less makes sense. It's organized chaos. And the fact that the show can control the chaos so well means they can embrace the chaos while still keeping some form of internal logic. Speaking of internal logic, another great way they ground absurdism is with Milo's backpack. If you've watched YouTubers analyze cartoons enough, you might have heard of a term called hammer space, which is a term used to explain how cartoon characters can produce an object presumably out of thin air. Milo is able to stay prepared and diligent towards every eventuality caused by Murphy's Law thanks to his signature backpack, with an impossible amount of storage that he can pack with all sorts of practical and just weird items that his quick thinking can utilize for almost any situation. Milo's backpack is even mentioned on a subsection of Hammerspace's TV Tropes page, the Bag of Holding. I don't think it's something most viewers see on the surface, heck I didn't until I sat down to work on this video, but internally, most viewers can tell when things are just a little too ridiculous. There's only so far most are willing to suspend their disbelief. And it would be so easy for the crew of this show to take that suspension for granted because of the concept, but part of the unique charm of Milo Murphy's Law is how it's able to ground its insanity so it doesn't lose its audience or the story it's trying to tell with each episode. Whether it's trying to pass a science experiment, finish a race, get a pizza, or wait in line for hours for a movie when you already purchased tickets in advance, the series has way too much fun making ordinary outings and tasks go as wrong as they possibly could. One minute you're taking the subway to a museum, the next you wind up in an underground society of trapped construction workers.
It's a democratic, hierarchical society.
But all that said, not all the show's attempts at antics, and especially comedy, are a home run. You know how most comedy has the rule of threes? Well, this show seems to love the rule of fours or fives. This doesn't happen too much, but it's often enough to be a problem for me. Quite a few episodes have gags that are either revisited incessantly or really overstay their welcome. The humor in the show works the best to me when they build on what's there and make it bigger and crazier. The llama incident is probably the best example of this done well, but then you have moments like in Smooth Operator where one scene has parts of the stage collapsing and interrupting the performance, and then more collapses, and then some more, and then even more, and then a bit more.
I get it! Move on!
Watching the season again, I think this problem comes down to the fact that for a good chunk of its first season, Milo Murphy's Law doesn't have a B-plot. Phineas and Ferb episodes were never evenly split between its subplots, but there was something else, usually drastically different from the other stories, to cut back to before any of those stories or the jokes told in them got stale. This isn't a roadblock this show hits a lot, but it's often enough to stand out when watching multiple episodes, and at times left me groaning rather than laughing. But when the show needs to slow down the insanity, it is still full of the meta, self-aware, contradictory humor we've come to expect from this team, and it's the best. Something else I kind of appreciate about this show is that when it comes to the main cast, these kids feel like people, if that makes sense. While they're capable of over-the-top reactions, they're not over-the-top characters. Melissa, for example, is a cool overachiever who can't resist a challenge, but these character traits are never blown to Flanderization. They're just part of who she is and how she approaches the world. She's curious and a problem solver, which is why she gravitates towards Milo when most of the kids avoid him like the plague, which I think the show implies at one point the Murphy family caused. She sees that Milo is a good, fun guy, and is happy to have him as a friend, and is ready for all the obstacles that come with that. She gets nervous around him sometimes, of course, like the time she had to ride a roller coaster with the living magnet of collateral damage, but Melissa's a girl who's willing to look beyond the surface, and likes the bizarre external challenges that come with being Milo's friend. She even tries to figure out Murphy's Law and how it works, trying to see if she can help Milo control it somehow, and it's kind of sweet to see how much she's willing to stick by him, with no romantic subtext at all. Thank God. Zach is the new kid in town that Milo put in life or death situations on the first day of school, like you do, and another character that has traits that would be so easy to exaggerate for the lulz, but instead it's more subdued and only comes out when it's needed. While Melissa is the cool one, Zach, being the newest member of the group, still has quite a bit to adjust to when it comes to living with Murphy's Law, forcing him to face a lot of his own fears and the anxiety these kind of situations can create. And I really like how his growing friendship with Milo consistently challenges him to overcome his own doubts, and most of the time he does. It's hardly Steven Universe, but it's solid characterization. But because he's the new kid, there are some things his new friends don't know about Zach, and we get to find out fairly early on.
You've been there from the start. Chop away at my heart.
Yep, Zach used to be part of a boy band. I can't speak for how much of a surprise this is, since I missed a few episodes and saw the episode where Zach's band members return before I saw Secrets and Pies where it was revealed, but it's definitely an interesting backstory, and also freaking hilarious. I have heard some people wonder how Melissa and Milo didn't know this when a few people in the episode seem to know the Lumberjacks. To that I say, I only found out who Billie Eilish was after her carpool karaoke appearance, and I couldn't even tell you a single one of her songs. Not everyone knows every bit of pop culture. Then there's the Murphy family. The Murphy parents are a great pair, and I love how Milo's dad is the chief safety inspector for the city, because so many things go wrong around him that if the precautions can withstand him, they must be good. Now that's funny. And because Murphy's Law apparently only affects the males in this family, Milo's sister Sarah just has to live with Murphy's Law through association. And while she does have her frustrations with it, she has a great relationship with her brother, and on more than one occasion decides that the time she spends with him is worth the disasters that he manifests. And that's really sweet. She's also a big fan of the show's sci-fi series Dr. Zone, which is pretty much all you need to know about Sarah as a person. And Dr. Zone's cool and all, but personally, I'll take Inspector Spacetime any day.
I'm the Inspector. Where have we wound up this time? The question isn't where, Constable, but when.
And of course, there's Milo himself. You can tell that between Milo and Phineas Flynn, Dan and Swampy are really fond of glass half full protagonists. Milo is an incredibly optimistic guy considering what he has to live with every day. There are people out there who like Milo, and people who despise him and think what he inadvertently causes is a nuisance, but he treats them all the same, with kindness and respect. Milo has decided to turn his unfortunate curse into an opportunity, a chance to look at the excitement and challenge a day can bring and being able to prove that you can handle it. Something he expresses in the very first episode.
You want to live like those other kids? They took a bus to school today. A bus! Does that seem like more fun to you?
Milo is clever, resourceful, and optimistic. He knows he can't control what happens around him, but he can control how to deal with it, which is really uplifting when you give it some thought, and I'm sure some viewers who have something go wrong in their lives will likely keep that in mind if they enjoy Milo as a character. But while I think Milo Murphy's Law has a pretty strong main cast, the supporting cast is a much more mixed bag, and it's one of the areas where I feel this show is slightly inferior to Phineas and Ferb. Maybe it's just because the show is younger, but there were tons of side characters in Phineas and Ferb, all leaving a long-lasting and memorable impression. And there are quite a few of those on Milo Murphy's Law too, but it feels like for every great side character, there's a forgettable or weird one. There's teachers like Mr. Draco, who may or may not be a vampire, and the constant ambiguity on that is hilarious, but then there's ones like this teacher, who's oddly admiring of her desk. Yeah, let's just call it that and not read into it any more than the show does. With the kids, there's characters like Amanda, who seem to develop more as the season goes on as she starts to see the brighter side of Milo. But then there's Bradley, who makes for a good foil in the first 3 episodes, but seems to become rapidly less relevant with every single story. And kids like Mort, who are in the show a lot, but don't have much of note to offer, at least to me. This does even out somewhat with recurring side characters like Elliot, the overly protective and authoritative crossing guard, and the underground, questionably stable dweller Scott, who both get a lot of great moments. It's just weird to me how many side characters they introduced in the first season, and only a little over half leave a lasting impression. But there are some very special characters who become much more interesting and worthy discussion over the course of the first season: Cavendish and Dakota. They start off the show as unusual looking and overly protective pistachio salesmen, and given that, like I said, Phineas and Ferb was known for eccentric background characters, I didn't think much of them when I started watching. I just saw how their pistachios keep getting destroyed by Milo, and thought of them as nothing more than a running gag. But as time goes on, these two and their actions get more suspicious until it's eventually revealed that they aren't some salty snack enthusiasts, but time travelers sent to the past to keep the pistachio from going extinct. Why? Well, because they are really incompetent time agents and aren't trusted to take on a responsibility greater than this, and their boss, Mark Hamill, really likes pistachios. This is not only a really bizarre and funny idea, perfect for the Dan and Swampy style of series, but it finally gives the show a compelling B-plot. Cavendish and Dakota quickly become fan favorites, and continue the trend set by Perry the Platypus and Dr. Doofenshmirtz of having a B-story so strong it could make for a series on its own. As time goes on, not only do Cavendish and Dakota's motivations become clearer, but their approach to their mission changes considerably over the first half of the season, when they notice that Milo seems to be around whenever their missions go wrong and pistachios are destroyed. Once they get more involved, it definitely gives the episodes more energy and certainly more laughs, with a great odd coupled team dynamic between the two of them that never ceases to be amusing. Though that's not surprising considering they're played by the creators themselves. And in hindsight, that should have been a clue that these two were going to be more important than they seemed. But it gets better. For the first half of the season, Milo Murphy's Law is very episodic. While there are things referenced and called back to more than once, for the most part the episodes are fairly self-contained, until Cavendish and Dakota, but mainly Cavendish, start to get suspicious of Milo. Unlike Phineas and Ferb, this story compelled you to never miss an episode and watch the show in order. Now, the dynamic of these two constantly failing to protect the pistachio, all the while convinced that Milo is out to sabotage them, when really he's doing this unknowingly, could have very easily been stretched out as the traditional status quo for the series. And there could have been some fun there for sure. Lord knows this team knows how to keep a very repetitive formula entertaining, but this show goes in a different direction with the hour-long episode, Missing Milo. But before we go more into that, let's look at the production as a whole. That might have been abrupt, but Shut up. First of all, the character designs. The looks of the characters in this show are certainly more down to earth than the incredibly cartoony, silhouette-friendly looks of Phineas and Ferb, but they are still appealing and distinct, toning down the style of Dan and Swampy's work, but still recognizable as a world they created. Maybe this time they just wanted to make sure their characters could face more than one direction without complication. I think the only one with an oddly proportioned design is Dog, but he's still adorable, so that's cool. And even if they toned it down a bit, there are certainly some ridiculous design choices that are very amusing. The animation itself is really smooth, keeping up with the fast-paced action and comedy excellently, especially for a first season. And I'd have to assume it's because they already had a massively successful show under their belts, so the mouse was willing to throw them an extra money bag to add some extra frames and make those CG models look a bit more natural. The voice cast is a home run. If you've heard anything about this show, you've probably heard that Milo is voiced by none other than Weird Al Yankovic, and it's not nearly as distracting as you think. He gives Milo that welcoming enthusiasm he really needs, and I get the feeling the character really came together once they cast him. And of course, he plays the accordion. Also like its predecessor, this show brings in some Disney Channel talent who could be seen as stunt casting, but do an incredible job voice acting. McKay Curtis is apparently from one of these shows and does great work in both Zach's cool and panicking moments. Plus, dude can sing. And you might remember Sabrina Carpenter from Girl Meets World, I know I did, and she fits Melissa so perfectly. The rest of the cast is loaded with great and veteran voice talent, and I already praised Povenmire and Marsh as this amazingly incompetent duo. And shout out to D. Bradley Baker, who plays the dog, because of course he does. But something I'm sure a lot of people were looking forward to are the songs. Milo Murphy's Law does continue the trend of great songs that this team are known for, though no longer under the restriction of one song per episode that Phineas and Ferb was, so there aren't nearly as many of them, and I think the ones that are there might be shorter. Still, there are quite a few catchy songs performed in the season. I know a lot of people get excited when Milo gets one, though he doesn't have nearly as many as I thought he would, considering the reputation of these creators and the icon who's voicing him. I don't know if I should respect or be baffled by the restraint here, but when the opportunities come for character songs, they're usually lively and memorable. But perhaps the thing that makes Milo Murphy's Law stand out to me is the great attention to setup, continuity, and character and story progression. I know this is really common nowadays, but I don't think I'm alone in thinking that that was not going to be the case with this show, especially since Phineas and Ferb stuck to its core episodic formula to the point of self-parody.
And the summer just keeps going on and on. It feels like it's been going on for like 4 years.
But all that changes with the episode Missing Milo, an epic hour-long episode where the characters from the A plot and B plot come together to fight a horde of giant mutated pistachio monsters from the future. It's a long story, and once they manage to resolve that, this familiarity continues. Missing Milo fundamentally changes the status quo of the series in a way that's very surprising, dumping Cavendish's suspicions about Milo in the first 5 minutes when they could have very easily and entertainingly dragged it on for years. Instead, they decide to move on and see what other stories and jokes they can tell now that the truth is clear and these characters know each other pretty well. Watching the two main stories of this show interact on a more regular and casual basis from here on out is a really refreshing change of pace from what we're used to. One way isn't necessarily better than the other, but it's different. I feel like that's an important distinction to make. While this show has a lot of comfortable similarities to Phineas and Ferb, mostly in its humor and songs, this sense of progression and development is what I feel makes this show stand on its own. Ultimately, the style of story they tell doesn't really change. Milo still tries to do everyday things with Murphy's Law getting in the way. Cavendish and Dakota fail dramatically no matter their mission, but the show makes enough adjustments to the relationships between its characters that the core formula of these stories has other directions it can take, giving way to new, exciting possibilities. This connection to the two subplots, and many other things for that matter, come to a head in the season 1 finale, Fungus Among Us. Now, even though I've talked a lot about how this show develops over time, I am about to go into the biggest spoilers of the entire series, so if you haven't watched the show yet and are curious about it, I highly suggest you stop here, check out the first season, and come back. For those still here, let's elaborate. It turns out that a rogue pistachion managed to escape being erased from existence at the end of Missing Milo. How, I don't really know, so I'm gonna go with he was displaced in time before that happened, so he existed even before he was created. Sure, let's go with that.
wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey.
From 1965, he assembles a new army who are slowly replacing everyone on Earth over the next 50 years. After a lot of close calls, it's up to Milo, Cavendish, Dakota, DOG, and the creator and star of Dr. Zone, again, it's a long story, to find a way to set this all right. The only way they can think of how to do that is to find the man who originally invented time travel, Professor Time. And while he hasn't managed to do that in the present yet, they do track down his apartment to see if he can help. Huh, you know, something about this shade of purple seems familiar to... Wait a minute! I know those music cues!
Professor Time? My name is Milo Murphy.
Oh, please, 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 tell me this is going where I think it is!
Wait, you're not the pizza delivery guy. This is my pizza delivery guy trap.
Brilliant! Yes!
So yeah, Milo Murphy's Law might do a good job standing on its own, but all this time, they were in the same universe as Phineas and Ferb. Not even the same universe, the same town. Milo and his friends live in Danville. Did you ever notice that this show never mentioned where they lived? I sure didn't, though eagle-eyed viewers did notice a sign or two that revealed this. There were some connections and little Easter eggs to Phineas and Ferb before this. Phineas Flynn's Law even made a neat compilation of all of them, but most of them could be waved off as cheeky references.
Oh, hey, there's squirrels in my pants. There's squirrels in my pants.
The only major one that made people question if this was a shared universe was this moment from the episode Milo's Lard, where something very interesting happened to Melissa's science project.
Done!
This was probably the most concrete piece of evidence that the Murphys and the Flynn Fletchers weren't too far apart, and we get that confirmed at Comic-Con 2017, where it was announced that a crossover between the two shows was in the works. And as hyped as I was, I thought for sure we were going to have to wait a while for this to even begin. So imagine my surprise when this was the last image of an episode that aired only a couple of months later. Alright then, I'm ready. The world's about to end, Doofus Mertz is back, and the rest of the old gang is not far behind. Let's see what happens next.
Good evening, children and immature adults.
Wait, what? What's going on? Why is it suddenly Halloween? What happened to the pistachions? And now we're gonna celebrate Christmas too, like nothing happened? What gives? Okay, so for reasons I still don't fully understand, Disney decided to air the season finale with a cliffhanger that led into quite possibly the show's biggest and most anticipated event before the obligatory holiday episodes. Now, the holiday episodes aren't bad by any means, they're pretty good, but seeing them mess with the schedule like that was disorienting, infuriating, and probably confusing to any kids watching the show. I get that they had to air the holiday episodes during the holidays, but then why didn't they just wait until January to air the finale? I know Disney is known for these incidents of running episodes out of order, but I have never seen a more careless example of it than this. Alright, whatever, the holidays are over, surely we'll get to the crossover in January, right? Well... sort of. The Milo Murphy's Law Phineas and Ferb crossover premiered in January of 2019, almost 17 months after Fungus Among Us aired.
You have got to be kidding.
But that's technically season 2, so I think now's a good time to wrap this up. Overall, season 1 of Milo Murphy's Law definitely has some kinks to iron out, but as a whole, it's a creative, entertaining, and really impressive debut season. It's hardly the most ambitious program on Disney's schedule, but it's not only a great successor of Dan and Swampy's previous work for the channel, but a really good show in its own right. The animation and voice work are really high quality for a first season, and the ambition it has to keep a lot of the things that worked about its predecessor, but try something new and expansive with the world they created is really cool to watch unfold. This was not at all the experience I thought I was going to get from this show, and I love it. It's a nice mix of episodic antics and larger overarching story development, and I think if you miss Phineas and Ferb, it will definitely fill that void while giving you a new, engaging group of characters and stories to get attached to. I do have my issues with the series as a whole, and there are some dud episodes, but the good really outweighs the bad, and it's become one of my favorite shows to rewatch when I need to unwind and could use a laugh. So it's great that there are even more adventures to come, but right now, it's time to reveal my...
It's my world and we're all living in it.
For season 1, It's Fungus Among Us. What can I say? I'm predictable. But it's not just the amazing cameo at the end. I wouldn't call an episode my favorite for 15 seconds of screen time. Fungus Among Us is a great season cliffhanger, bringing together the two plots we've been following for the majority of the season up to this point, and having a lot of fun with the time travel references, challenges, and even making payoff sort of a joke, which sounds frustrating, but on this show it works. On top of that, this episode really brings the suspense, first through the realization of the impending threat of the Pistachions, and then the relentless chase it sends our heroes on, with obstacle after obstacle having them overcome several challenges, but desperate enough to leave on that amazing reveal. It both ties a lot of things together and leaves behind a ton of questions. But for some standalone examples of the best that you can expect from this season on a more regular basis, I'd also recommend The Race, Secrets and Pies, and the llama incident. So I think I should clarify that I have every intention of covering the crossover in a separate video. When? Well, I'm gonna follow in Disney's footsteps and just keep you all in suspense, which is my cute way of saying I have no idea. I will, I promise, I just don't know when. But until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.